So this week we're going to be learning about positive presuppositions. And the first thing that we need to think about is, what is a presupposition? So a presupposition is actually based on an assumption that we make about something. So there's danger with assumptions. You know, we've all heard about that. What does an assumption really mean? And we don't really know. But there's dangers with presuppositions as well. Since they're based on assumptions, sometimes they may present a different meaning than what we intended. So let's pause and think about that for a minute. A presupposition may present a different meaning than what we intended. But if we are intentionally making a positive presupposition, we can positively communicate a belief about someone's ability and willingness to do something. So this is similar to why we see recommendations that classroom rules should be presented positively. So I'm going to offer this example. It's kind of actually going to be far away, and then I'm going to bring it back around. So let's say that you have a classroom rule that says no talking when the teacher is talking. That is making an assumption that someone is going to talk when the teacher is talking. However, if we say listen for opportunities to ask questions, that sets an expectation for behavior. Now, not everyone will interpret the message the same way. It's going to differ from person to person because it is the mind that receives and interprets that message. So for some, it may take a little bit to wrap their mind around that. And the thing there is, really, you might be hearing this and think, no, my kids need to know that talking whenever I am talking is being disrespectful. They just need to not talk. I wouldn't even go with the listen for opportunities to ask questions. Okay, that's fine. But I want you to think about this. Suppose you go into a training, professional development of some sort, and the presenter says, hey, whenever we get started today, if I'm talking, there's no talking. Y'all need to be listening. Versus if the presenter says, hey, today, whenever we're meeting, I want you to be listening for opportunities to ask questions. Okay, so first of all, there was a big change in the tone of my voice. But then also it is the tone of the question as well, that it's not saying this is what you're not doing. It's basically an invitation of, here's something I want you to do. Now, again, back in the classroom, you may choose to go with the no talking with the teachers talking, but I want you to think about this as an adult learner. Which of these would you rather have presented to you? Likewise, I want you to be thinking about whenever you're coaching, you're actually working with adult learners. So phrasing this in a positive light actually may set a better tone than if we go the opposite way. Okay, so let's look at some examples. Okay, so first of all, let's define positive presupposition again. It's going to communicate a positive belief in someone's capacity, ability, or willingness to do something. So let's look at two different statements. Let's suppose you go into a classroom and you say at the end of it, even so-and-so was engaged. That was fabulous. Versus if you say, it looks like you've intentionally chosen strategies to encourage engagement. So what criteria was used to determine your strategies? So the first statement of even so-and-so was engaged actually conveys an assumption that we did not expect that particular student to be engaged. In that case, we're defining who that student is and what the expectations for that student are. So even though it was presented in an encouraging way, it was a negative statement. Now, likewise, you remember we talked before about whenever we say, well, even so-and-so was engaged, now I've got the ceiling. And so if my thinking is I'm going to do everything I can to engage so-and-so, then I may not be really thinking about what else was going on in the classroom, and I may not be even thinking about how those strategies, whatever they were very specific to that lesson. And I might start reusing those strategies more and more and more just to engage whoever that kid was. And then those strategies are going to become ineffective. Okay? So in the second statement, we're recognizing lots of things. We're recognizing the skills that were used in the lesson. We're valuing the planning process. The paraphrase, it looks like you've intentionally chosen strategies to encourage engagement. That acknowledges the hard work the teacher has used to improve instruction. And then the question, what criteria have you used to determine the strategies that you used in the lesson? That encourages the teacher to define their goals and also reflect on what has worked in the past. So from this example about engagement, you can see that positive presuppositions can be coupled with a paraphrase or a question, or they could stand alone. The whole point there is that it encourages additional risk-taking, and it can also be used for the shift if you need to shift the conversation in the opposite direction. So we're going to try some out. We're going to use our skills of questioning and paraphrasing to turn statements and questions into positive presuppositions. Now remember, the goal here is to assume positive intent in regards to capabilities and willingness. So our first one, I don't know why the kids aren't doing their homework. This is a negative statement made by a teacher who's probably frustrated. So I might respond with this teacher with this question. I might say, well, do you think the homework is too hard for them? Or do you think maybe you're giving them too much homework? If I do that, there's two problems. One, I've asked a question that is going to be answered with a yes or no. And to be quite honest, the answer is going to be no, because the teacher isn't going to intentionally give students work that's too hard. They're also not going to intentionally give students work that's like too much homework. And if it's unintentional, the answer is still going to be no, because they're not doing that on purpose. And now you've put yourself in a position that's like a lose-lose situation. You're either going to have to forget about this problem altogether and say, you're right, I don't know why these kids aren't doing their homework. Or you're going to have to fight yourself out of a corner by trying to tell them, yeah, you really are giving them work that's too hard or something like that. And here's the problem. That's not coaching. Remember, whenever we think about that coaching continuum, those kinds of statements are over there on the evaluation side. And so that's not going to get us where we need to go. So instead, you could acknowledge the frustration and show some empathy with this teacher by saying something like, you're working really hard to ensure your students are learning. Knowing how committed you are to ensuring your students' success, you've probably tried lots of strategies in your class. What ones really seem to be the most effective for meeting your learning goals? So with this example, I've communicated multiple things. First of all, I've just shown empathy for this teacher's frustration. Secondly, I have acknowledged that the teacher cares and that their goal is students learning. And finally, I've given them an invitation to discuss what strategies they've tried and what has been effective. So there's some do's and don'ts with positive presuppositions. We're going to start out with the don'ts. Don't start your questions with things like, well, have you tried cooperative learning? Or can you assign students less work? Or what if you changed this? Because the reason for that is, first of all, they're closed-ended, and secondly, they presume negative intentions. I'm like putting judgment on people whenever I do this. So instead, whenever we are making positive presuppositions, we need to include 7 things. Show positive intentions. We need to focus on a reflective solution. We need to invite dialogue and vision. And vision is like way in the future kind of vision. So like at the end of the school year, What should students know and be able to do? That kind of thing. We need to include specific actions, consider the resources that are available. We want to make sure it connects to our goals. And then finally, we're going to encourage some responsibility for the action. Okay, so there's some ways that we can go about this. There's some question stems right here that can help us get there. So we could say something like, based on your data, what kinds of strategies are working for students learning that particular topic? Or having tried one PBL unit, what was something that was really effective? Or in what ways are students showing you that they really understand this? Okay, so think about, first of all of those we're assuming students are learning. That's the big thing there. We're making the assumption that students are learning. So let's take a look at what those 7 things are going to look like. Some examples of how we can achieve these goals. That first one was showing positive intent. So something like, well, knowing that our goal for PBL is fill in the blank there. You can take it from there. The reflective solutions. So what options and strategies are you considering with your PBL? That invitation of dialogue and vision. And this one here, the way it's written right now, I think I would change it. It says, after you finish your PBL unit, what will you be celebrating? Because the way that I've phrased that, someone could say, I'm celebrating that it's over. How about instead you say, after you finish your PBL unit, what will you be celebrating about what students know, about what students have learned? The specific actions there. As you're starting to plan your PBL, what is your first step? And then for your resources, you think about that along with your instructional design model that you're using. So if you're using the 5 E's, you might say something like, what resources are you utilizing in the Explore section? If you're using a different model, you might say, so what resources are students going to be using when they're working independently? Just phrasing that around there so that we know we need to go look for some resources. And then connection to the goal, notice that in every single one of these, I've put in the words PBL or I've made a reference to the instructional design model that we're choosing. So that way that's in the forefront. That's our goal. And then that responsibility for the action, that would be something like, so as we're wrapping up, what are some things that you're thinking you want to do between now and the next time we talk? So what we're going to do is take some of our, take some different questions, take some different statements, and we're going to turn them around so that they are positive presuppositions. You're going to have those listed, and I want you to respond to all 5 of them and post 2. Okay, so let's look at them very quickly. PBL is confusing for my students. If someone were to say that, how could you flip that around so it's a positive presupposition and it's going to stay a paraphrase? Likewise, something that has nothing to do with PBL. How can we paraphrase, I only hear from parents when they're upset about something? Some questions. We want this to be a positive presupposition, but stay a question. Are you using cooperative learning in your PBL? Flip that around so instead of pointing it out, it's a positive presupposition. How about what things are going to change for the next PBL unit you teach? Let's make that one positive. That one is not positive at all right now. And finally, can you think of any reasons students would act that way? Flip that around so it is a positive presupposition. Now, as you're doing that, there are some references that I want you to be aware of. Remember that you are going to do all 5 of these and post 2.